All right, it looks like it's the top of the hour. So on behalf of the full University of Kentucky Shore Resource Center team, I would like to extend a warm welcome to everyone that we have joining us for today's webinar. If you're new to our program, we provide support to institutions that are eligible for the NIH R16 program across the country. Today's session is part of an ongoing series. So if you learn a lot today and you are encouraged to join us again, please keep in mind that signing up for our email communications will let you know when we have new webinar offerings on the calendar. As always, we are recording today's session and we'll make that available through our YouTube channel. Do give us 2 or 3 business days to trim and upload that video, but we will notify you by email once it's ready. So today, we are excited to look at a slightly different topic than what we've done over the past year. We are joined by 2 of our colleagues from the University of California at Santa Barbara. So Drs. Erica Lubin and Javier Reed de Alanis. They're going to speak to you about some tools for managing student research. So I'll welcome them to the screen.
Okay. Thanks, Melissa.
Thanks, Melissa.
Hi, everyone. We're really pleased to be talking with you today about this topic of managing student research. And whether you are faculty in charge of your own research groups, in administrative and supporting roles on your campus supporting faculty and researchers, or trainees yourselves in the early stages of your research journey, we hope that today's discussion will be an opportunity to exchange some ideas, share some tools and strategies that will hopefully help you build really happy, healthy, and productive research teams. So who are we and why are we talking about this? My name is Erica Lubin. I'm the Associate Director at the Center for Science and Engineering Partnerships here at UC Santa Barbara.
And my name is Javier Reed de Alanis. I'm a professor in the chemistry and biochemistry department at UC Santa Barbara. But we're also involved in a number of other initiatives on campus and off campus. And so we just want to share with you a little bit about our experience in different categories, just to give you a sense of who we are.
So we're by no means, experts at this topic, but because of our experience in all these, we do have some thoughts to share with you. So, for example, some of the programs, the undergraduate programs that I've been involved in managing are the NIH MARC program. Javier directs the NSF PREM program with New Mexico Highlands University. We both direct our NSF Bridge to the Doctorate program here for graduate students and also advise our SOCNIS graduate chapter.
And so in addition to those, we also have experience with kind of larger centers and initiatives. And so I'm the director of a relatively new center that's launched in 2020 called BioPacific MIP. And so this is a center that is actually a user facility. And so this is certainly a resource for everybody who is looking for research that's in soft materials. We actually serve a user facility at UC Santa Barbara and UCLA where people can come either to a summer school or to the facility to work on their research. But what this provides us is with a pretty large cohort of students that participate in training and workforce development. And so Erica actually leads the workforce development within BioPacific MIP. And then both of us have a number of experience coming to this just from training undergraduate and graduate researchers within our own research programs. And this is something that, we're leveraging these different experiences to kind of guide us through the discussion that we have for you today.
So who are you and why are you attending? Based on registration, more than 3/4 of you identified as being faculty, about 20% identified as being in positions of research administration or other support roles on campus, and then the remaining percentage are trainees. And so this is a nice sort of variety of stakeholders in this topic. And to just get a little more information from you, we would like for you to fill out a very quick poll so that we can get a sense for where you're at and your motivation for attending. So let me start that. So hopefully you should see the poll now.
And so we'll give you just a couple of minutes just to kind of go through and answer the poll. And then once you're done, we'll share a little bit of the results. Wonderful. We're getting really good feedback. And so we'll go ahead and just hold this for about 30 more seconds, and then people can finish filling out their questions.
Okay. So we'll end the poll and see how everyone answered. So it really is a spread. Some of you are in the early stages of starting your research group. Some are definitely established, 43%. And then there's a good fraction who are in support positions and several trainees, which is wonderful to see. And then this is good for us to just kind of get a sense for how many students, those of you who are PIs, have mentored. So thank you so much for sharing. So, so what do we hope you'll walk away with from today's session? Well, we're kind of combining the topics into 3 themes, and we're really hoping in the end you will come away with hopefully an increased awareness of the tools that are out there, especially for individual trainee success. Maybe some new strategies in communication and effective lab team sort of work and confidence building. And then finally, we hope that all of this discussion and these tools and exchange of ideas will give you increased confidence in creating productive and happy research teams, whether you are in charge of your own team, whether you're supporting research on your campus, or whether you are participating as young researchers. Hopefully, these tools will help you come away with more sort of empowerment and confidence moving forward. And I also just want to take a moment to thank 2 of our colleagues, Professor Beth Pruitt and Professor Kathy Foltz here at UC Santa Barbara, for some of the materials that they've shared for this workshop. We had done a workshop earlier here on our campus for which some of this content has come from. So thank you for their contributions as well. So the content that we want to be sharing about today can really fall under one of 2 categories. The first is those tools and strategies that are mentor-driven. So these are the tools and the ideas that you as faculty, as principal investigators, are driving and providing to your researchers and implementing in your research teams. And a lot of them are around making sure that the things that are very obvious and sort of well understood to senior researchers and PIs may not be understood or obvious at all to new researchers. And so a lot of the tools that we'll discuss today are around making sure that these kind of hidden expectations and the hidden culture in research is really made quite obvious, and the sort of, so to speak, the implicit is made explicit to your researchers. And then the other category of tools that we want to share today are really student-driven tools. So these are tools that you as mentors will be supporting and encouraging your students to participate in and use, but they're really meant to be driven by the trainees themselves. And they are really supposed to help the trainees develop their own sense of identity around being scientists, and really help them to identify their goals and to know how to reach those goals. And so they're great ways for you to be supporting that individual development.
Wonderful. So what we have decided is we'll break this up into kind of at least starting with the mentor-driven tools. And we broke this up into 3 general categories that I think will help hopefully address many of the broad audience that are on the webinar today. And so I want to start with just lab expectations. And then we'll move to kind of thinking more about at the undergraduate and graduate level of mentor-mentee expectations. And then lastly, we'll touch briefly on kind of campus support, and especially for those of you that are coming from a supportive role, what might be some of the network building or opportunities that you could provide young or experienced PIs with as we think about these different tools. So the first thing that we want to talk about is, really how to use mentoring plan to build a productive research team. And I think many of us are on this call because in one way or another, we are all extremely busy in trying to figure out how can we, better build the productivity of the team, regardless of what level you're at. And so one of the things that we want to do is start with a little bit of kind of, what is a mentor? And how do we then use that definition of a mentor to help us cultivate better leadership, better mentorship? And then we'll talk through a couple of tools that Erica and I have had experience with. And certainly at the end, we hope to maybe provide you with a list of tools that we have collected, but maybe then we can also share some of the other tools that you guys have experience with. And ultimately, one of the goals of this is to figure out what is the benefit to you, as a PI to ultimately make a more productive research team. So what is a mentor? And I know that this has many, many flavors, and I think all of you on the call probably can answer this question. But what I wanted to highlight with this question is that you can easily see that a mentor is, in my opinion, not something that one single individual can do for every single person throughout their entire stages of their career. A mentor is a person who provides support for career development, maybe someone who teaches, a trusted advisor, or an individual who encourages you or to support to step out of your comfort zone. And when we think about kind of conveying what is the role of a mentor to either my students or to my colleagues, one of the key messages that we try to constantly communicate is that in reality, as you can see in something that is obvious, I think, to many of us, is that a mentor serves so many roles that it's not really possible to have one single mentor. And I encourage all of my students to really go about thinking about this and collecting mentors. And this idea then kind of makes this approach to what is a mentor a little bit more holistic, where you might have an individual who is a trusted advisor, but that person might not be the same mentor who's going to push you out of your comfort zone. And I think once you get around this idea of thinking about kind of collecting mentors, it makes it much more efficient to build a holistic approach to your mentoring plan. And I think there's lots of studies, and many of us probably have already experienced this, that it is clear to see the link between effective mentorship and increasing research productivity, student health, retention, and much, much more. And what those kinds of things point towards is that we need to take a more holistic approach, not only to mentorship, but then that supports the students throughout their entire development and career. So how do we think about doing that? And so some of the qualities that we want to discuss and to cultivate, is what do we need to cultivate to create that ideal team so that we can develop their leadership and mentorship skills? Many of us, again, I think this list of qualities probably is looking at this and saying, those are pretty obvious to me, Yes, it's very important, Javier, that we should be empathetic. And one of the key things is that we need to try to understand the views of the students and where they're at so you can meet them where they are. And one of the key messages, and we'll highlight this throughout, is that we need to really uncover what the students don't know. And so what we mean by these qualities of being empathetic is, let's say that we really need to try to uncover the unknown. And while some of these things might be very obvious to us, they might not be as obvious to our students. And that's kind of one of the key messages. So for example, one of the things that I've learned throughout my career is reliability is something that's very important. If we provide support, and we promise that, let's make sure that we provide it in real time. And so what are the tools that allow you to give that feedback to your students so that you can build not only the leadership skills, but also the environment of mentorship? And so that really comes to, one of the things that might be obvious to you of what those skills are. But this is a key thing, is that it's not really obvious to our students. And so no matter what level you're at, or how much experience you have, this is constantly changing. And so some of the things that you will experience, as a PI might be obvious to you, but some of those things are really hidden. And some of the experiences that your students might be undergoing are things like imposter syndrome, lack of confidence, lack of career knowledge, right? Each of us are coming at this from a different stage. Each of us are at different types of institutions, which are then mentoring students that are going into teaching, research, maybe into academia, maybe into industry. But really, a lot of our students might not be coming into this with a good knowledge of what the career opportunities are. And so how do we get some of that information that they don't know so that we can better mentor them and build a solid research team? The other things that just keep in mind is that obviously students are bringing lots of stuff to the table, right? There might be things that are hidden, such as anxiety and family finances or pressure. And so how do we uncover some of those things? And so what are the tools that we might use? So for us, the tools are really develop a clear line of communication. That's probably the most important, right? And how do we go about doing that? Establish peer support system. This kind of goes back to the slide of collecting mentors. The better that we can kind of establish the ecosystem, then the more is that they can rely on different mentors for different kind of stages in their career. What I'll talk most about is developing a strong lab structure, and we find this to be very important. And later in the presentation, Erica is going to talk about IDPs. But one of the key tools is that these tools that we're going to share with you, we really need these to be living activities, right? The fact is that we're going to have to constantly be evolving and changing so that we can meet, right, the growing trends as well as the needs of our students today, which certainly will be different than the ones of tomorrow. So how do I go about doing this? One of the tools that I use, and I think many of us use, is thinking about developing an expectation document for your group. It's irregardless of what level you're at or how much experience you have. I find that this expectation document is extremely important for developing both the lab structure as well as opening up those clear line of communications. And so in my document, things that I wanted to share with you guys is we have, what are our core values for the research group? But you can also see in the first paragraph that we really talk about, oh, this is a living document that the students get to engage with, and this allows them to be part of the process. The other thing that I think is very important is in this document to create those clear lines of expectations. I use this document as a tool to share with the students what my responsibilities are. I think many of us, this is also coming, it might seem obvious what the responsibility of a PI is, but depending on where the students are coming from, they might not know this. And so by clearly laying out what my responsibilities are, then they understand what they can come to me for as far as mentorship, or where they might need to fill in the gap with another mentor that might help them with their career development. In this document, we also really highlight, what are the expectations that I have as a PI of the students? And I think this is very important so that you then have a clear line of communication, what the expectations are when they join your group. And so this is a document that I give to all my students from day one, and then we revisit this every single year. And so we have some suggestions here for developing your own expectation document, and then there's other additional resources at the end of the presentation today. But things to think about are make this a living document. Invite your group to discuss and edit this document with you so that they can give you feedback, right? And allow them input in how the expectations are being generated. This document should allow you to establish clear expectations and things like, depending on if you're at a research institution, what are your research expectations? What are your expectations for writing papers or notebooks? If you're at a teaching institutions, what are your expectations for class? What are your expectations for getting involved in going off and giving poster presentations or other things? So you can tune, right, what your expectations are depending on what your goals are as a PI. Identify things that might be potential categories that are oftentimes areas of conflict, let's say authorship, and add that in as a philosophy so that everyone knows early on how you might think about those things, and they have that information in advance before any types of issue might arise. But the main communication and structure that then provides you a better ability to assess how your research group is doing. The other tool that I typically use, and I think, and Erica will cover this in much more detail in the IDP section, is a version of an IDP that's a little bit more tailored for my specific needs. And so at the start of each year, I ask each member of my group to provide me a list of their goals on 3 slides. And I ask them to define what their goals are for a project. In our case, the goals for publication, and then their goals for career. If you're at an undergraduate institution, maybe instead of publication, again, it is goals for presenting their work at a symposium or going to a conference. But you can tailor what you ask your students about depending on what you need for your own goals. But the main message here is that you want to learn where your students are at so that you can meet them where they are. And so as an example, if I ask them what is their project goals, I don't leave it open-ended. Try to provide a little bit of detail. For example, what is the key experiment or proof of principle that they need to test for that year? And that way, this is another tool that you can then go over this with them and use this as an opportunity to make sure that they understand the project well, that their goals of the project align with your goals. And this gives you just another metric to sit down with the students so that you can then engage with them and make sure that you understand where they're at, where you're at, and try to find a way to meet in the middle. This is true with career development, and I find this to be very productive, right? Because when I sit down and I ask for what the students' career developments are, oftentimes this is where I really get to learn what they want to do after they've done their research experience. And this then allows me to tailor some of the opportunities that I expose them to throughout the year. So if they want to go into industry, then I get to know that, and I get to then learn, like, well, might be opportunities on campus that they get to learn more about industry internships, and I can point them in that direction. But this is another tool to really learn where the students are so that they can then help them to mentor them in a better way. And so I find these to be very successful. The take-home message is I think it's important to help your mentees develop their own interest and for them to feel like they have a community which supports their interest. And using these tools, whether it's an expectation document or checking in on their goals, as a tool to engage with the students and give them direct feedback in a timely fashion. And so with that, I'll turn this over to Erica to talk a little bit more about the mentor-mentee expectation agreement.
Thanks, Javier. So kind of building on the lab expectations document that Javier was talking about in his own lab, we have created what we describe as a mentor-mentee expectations agreement, but it's really a document that's intended to help early stage researchers, so especially undergraduates who might just be starting research for the very first time, be brand new to the research process, and have a lot of questions and their own expectations that might not be in alignment with the expectations that you have as a mentor. And so, sort of the theme that keeps arising here is the goal with all of these is to make sure that you are clear with each other about your expectations and have those clear communication lines. And so a document like this, or this specific document, helps the mentor and mentee do that. And so in this way, we kind of preface what you think of as a lab expectations document with a list of questions that the student can come to the mentor with at the very start of a research project or research experience. And they can go through these questions that help them share what their own questions and expectations are for this experience, what maybe why they think they're getting involved in research and what they hope to get from it. And it's an opportunity for the mentor to respond and to be able to clarify any misunderstandings or questions that they have around what to expect, and to also then make sure that they can clearly articulate their own expectations for the student. So this is really about aligning expectations, and it's a great resource to use for especially short-term experiences. So for example, if you have an undergraduate coming in for just a 8 to 10 week summer research experience in your lab, or maybe a 1-term or 2-term experience in your lab, and you want to make the most of that time, this is a great way to kind of get off on a good footing. And so we will also provide this resource at the end of the presentation.
And so then the last piece with this mentor-driven tools is, this one is a little bit more broad because we're all coming from various organizations. And what we wanted to really just convey is that these are two ways of lab expectations and mentee agreements that are kind of direct for a PI in the research group. But really building that network and collecting mentors, we encourage everyone to kind of look at the resources that are available within their university or their community of science research so that they can leverage those to, for example, get external summer research experience, where then the students can gain research skills, access to instruments, expand their collaborations and networks. But mainly, what are the resources that are available on your campus that you can then broaden so that you can expose your students to help them and assist them in any way that you can? And we recognize that this is going to vary depending on the institution or organization that you're with. And that's why it's a little bit more difficult to provide direct tools just because there's so much variation depending on that. Okay, so the last piece that I want to talk about before I hand this over to Erica is one of the key things that I think we do want to acknowledge is that it's really important, you guys, to mentor yourself first. You will be a better role model if you take a few minutes to assess your own experience, workflow, and time. And so one of the things that we want to encourage everyone to do is really to take a moment to self-assess. And I really like this quote, right, from Lord Kelvin: if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. And I think we're all here on this webinar today because there are so many challenges, right, with wearing multiple hats, and how do you build a productive research team given the limited time and resources that many of us have. And so what I do, right, is on a relatively frequent basis, let's say once a quarter, because at UC Santa Barbara on the quarter system, I take a self-assessment of myself and make a simple pie chart. And I'm giving you an example of what that might look like, where in categories of things that go into my daily life: research, writing, mentoring, service, teaching, and roughly speaking, estimate over the, let's say, a 3-month time frame, how much time I spend at each of those activities. And I think that if we all do this, what we realize very, very quickly, right, is that our pie chart doesn't match very well with what we want with our own career or how we want to be a mentor. And if you start to ask yourself, does this, where I'm spending my time, lead to a stronger career? Does it bring me joy? Does it have value for the institution or my students or myself? As you start to ask those questions when you look at this pie chart, this then gives you the tool to then build and develop your own yes-no matrix. And really, this is the key to helping to reorganize the way you spend time, is developing your own yes-no matrix. One of the things that I like to do is, you don't always have to tell people why you're saying no, okay? Saying no is okay. And if you want to use this quote, you're welcome to, right? I must decline for secret reasons. They don't always need to know the why, but it's important to build your own matrix. I think we all in this webinar recognize that not all service and tasks are created equal. Some of them take a lot of time. Some people really enjoy or are more efficient at some tasks than others. And so you have to develop your own yes-no matrix. We all need to be aware of the time tax on women and underrepresented minorities, which add extra burdens to some of the activities we do. But the key thing is to create your own portfolio and choose how you want to build your career. And so what we want you guys to think about is, as you develop this, be very thoughtful of the things that you say yes to and learn how to say no. But the other thing, right, is this is important, is you should use this as another opportunity to teach your students how to say no. And this will then allow you, right, to kind of better mentor them, but also align their goals with your goals and increase your time management. And so with that, I want to turn over to Erica, who's going to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about student-driven tools. We recognize that there's questions that are popping up in the Q&A, which is great, and we'll address some of those towards the end, and we can come back to them at that time.
So, okay, thinking about a couple of student-driven tools. Now, of course, there are many different tools out there and strategies you can use. these are just a couple of the ones that we've seen to be high impact and hopefully kind of low stakes tools to implement. So the first Javier had touched on in the mentor expectations documents and the mentor-mentee agreement that we recommend as a useful tool. But it's really important to emphasize it again and make sure that the students are really behind it and feel like they are in charge of it. And that this is research productivity routine. So it's making sure that your student researchers feel like they are in a rhythm of regular check-ins, I mean, in some sense, it's accountability sessions, but mostly it's checking in so that they can have a chance to meet with the mentor, get some feedback on what's been happening either on a weekly basis or, you know, a bi-monthly basis, whatever kind of works for the pace of the research, and check in on things such as specific research goals. So again, you know, really breaking down what they want to accomplish in their research project into achievable goals and sort of time-limited goals, and other professional related goals, such as attending conferences, you know, if publications are part of it, publishing, and the other sort of pieces to staying on top of your productivity. And so I think getting into a routine can be really, really helpful for students because, again, they kind of know what to expect. They're getting that regular feedback, and they can see that they're making progress. And if they're stuck, they can know that there's going to be regular check-ins to help them get unstuck. And then kind of following up on that, one thing that has been really helpful is to encourage students to attend conferences. So once they've got a little bit of research under their belt, to encourage them to attend conferences, whether it's presenting a research project, if they have enough to present, or even sometimes just attending once they're kind of in the research community. It's a great way for them to expand their community of researchers and their network, to see themselves as belonging to a larger research community, perhaps meeting other students or mentors who they can relate to, especially if they're coming from smaller research programs at their institution or disciplines that, you know, are sort of have a smaller footprint. It can be really helpful to go outside of, you know, your little institutional community and broaden their network and really show them that there's a bigger world of scientists out there that they belong to. And some of the conferences that are very supportive of mentoring students can be great conferences for students to attend early on. So things like the SOCNAS and Abracam's national meetings and other affinity-focused conferences that are really, again, sort of putting a priority on mentoring students are a really nice introduction to attending conferences. The third thing to mention can be kind of a low-hanging fruit, but one that I think is not as easy as sort of readily implemented as I think it could be. And this is an exercise that both Javier and I have seen to be really beneficial to students, whether they are undergraduate and probably more so senior undergraduate level, or at the graduate and postdoc stage of training. And this is conducting informational interviews. And so those are very casual 20 to 30-minute conversations with a professional or perhaps a mentor that's in a career area that they're interested in. And conducting these informational interviews can not only help them make more informed decisions about their own training, sort of next steps, career decisions they're making, especially if they're sort of uncertain about what career direction they want to go in. This, again, is kind of a low stakes way of gathering information, making informed decisions. And then it can also expand their network and sometimes even lead to sort of getting these additional mentors that Javier has mentioned can be really helpful. So there are many resources out there, of course, on how to conduct informational interviews, kind of protocols that can be helpful for people who haven't done them before. UCSF has a really nice website that walks trainees through examples and ideas for how to do it. And so we'll provide that resource at the end. having lab alumni, so those who are in your research, former researchers in your research groups, connecting them with your current students can be a really great way for them to get these informational interviews started, because often they're, sort of, they have an initial connection and they're really happy to share about sort of where they are a couple steps ahead of your current trainees. And then, of course, if your trainees really need additional sort of career awareness and maybe are not sure what they want to do, there are so many resources out there talking about different types of careers in various science spaces, and especially in sort of the biology and biomedical research areas. iBiology has a nice suite of resources. Obviously, your national societies often have a variety of podcasts, interviews, resources that are linked to career trajectories that can be really helpful for students to have access to, especially within their own discipline. So it's a little more relevant to them. The final tool that I want to highlight might be one that you're very well familiar with, and one that Javier had mentioned, the individual development plan. So some of you might have done this yourself in your own training. And for those of you who haven't, it's basically a tool, a document, or it can be an online tool to help trainees self-reflect, assess, and set goals related to both their education and research training, as well as their career aspirations. And Javier mentioned sort of a streamlined version that he does with his students. There are many different versions, varieties that you can do. Really sort of the primary, I think, benefit is that it's a structure. It provides some additional structure to your mentoring, and also for the trainee who's being mentored, it provides that additional structure to them in receiving mentorship. And we've seen it be very helpful in students kind of just having a better sense for what's driving them, why they're doing this degree or this research they're interested in pursuing, and where they're heading. And especially students who are feeling stuck, it can help them kind of talk through getting unstuck. So it helps them identify both the personal and professional development needs, interests that they have, and then can help show them where their gaps are in their skill development, in their knowledge, in their mentoring network that they might need to fill in order to achieve their goals. And then, very importantly, it forces trainees to have actions that are time limited associated with their goals. And this piece, of course, we all know whenever we've tried to achieve any goal, you have to have some kind of time, timeline associated with the goals, and very discrete actions that must be embarked on to reach those goals. And so this is just a structure in order to kind of help you put that together. And the other thing that they do, which Javier had alluded to, is they really help students think about their career development. And so in thinking about the kinds of things and time that they're spending their energy on right now, and making sure that those are aligned with where they want to be in the future. And if those aren't aligned, helping the trainees align those things. And the final piece, which I think is really, really important, is that it provides kind of an excuse, I guess, to have these regular communications with your mentor and your mentee. And so having these kind of regular, as we would describe them, regular development meetings, can serve as a really nice communication tool that not only serves as this check-in point, but can actually help if there are other challenges or concerns that students are experiencing. It can be kind of an inroad to really dive into some of those, to maybe help students share what they're really having struggles with, however they're comfortable sharing. And so it can be useful in that term as well, because students may not feel comfortable sharing their concerns right off the bat, but they might feel comfortable getting to it when they're having a broader discussion about their overall goals and future aspirations. And so it can, in fact, mitigate feelings of imposter syndrome and help them build confidence because you're addressing these anxieties or these questions or these concerns that they're having in a structured, kind of safe format for them. And one of the resources that can help in these kinds of meetings, the NIH has put out a couple of years ago. It was from their Office of Intramural Training and Education, and they call it the Communication Hacks document. We have it also linked in the resources at the end. And it just provides additional talking points that can be helpful in these discussions. And so, as Javier had also pointed out, there are many studies that have been done on IDPs and doing similar kinds of activities that show that there is an increase in productivity. It reduces the number of conflicts with advisors and with peers in research teams, and can in general lead to overall increased satisfaction. So it's a nice tool to consider as part of your toolkit. And there are many different IDPs out there, self-assessment tools out there. There's so much. Perhaps your campus or maybe even in your own lab, you've developed ones that you like to use. There are online versions that are open access to everyone. My IDP and Chem IDP are two that are relevant to our group here. There are undergraduate versions. The American Physical Society has a nice, simple version for undergraduates, especially those just beginning out in research. And there's a sort of complementary tool from the University of Central Florida that connects SMART goals to the IDP. And so together, that's sort of a nice tool to use with undergraduates. And we use it with a lot of our summer research students. And the online versions, MyIDP and Chem IDP, are particularly useful for graduate and postdoc level exploration because they're a bit more detailed. There are also other tools out there. I just pointed to two of them from Stanford. A couple of years ago, Stanford put together something they call a meaningful work kit, which is a sort of 15 to 20-minute assessment that trainees can do to kind of align their values and their career interests. And then there's a book called Designing Your Life that has also come out of Stanford that is just another framework for thinking about goal setting and career planning. And so those have been useful tools to have. But I think the bottom line is that this is an opportunity for the trainee to take matters into their own hands, to do some self-reflection, some self-assessment, create this IDP, bring it to the mentor, get some feedback, revise it with that feedback, and check in every year, every 6 months, and kind of readjust so that they can continue to make progress and feel like they're really being productive in their future goals.
And so the last kind of two things that we wanted to say is these tools that we're providing you, and I'm reading some of the questions in the chat, is like, what happens when they don't work? And I think that this is one of the very important things of how do we use these tools and then how do we reevaluate them. But the other thing that's important to acknowledge is this graphic, which I find really funny, but also really telling. All the things that we described in the tools and the things that we constantly are doing, right, as PIs or administrators or even trainees, is trying to design ways to make things more efficient and more productive. But sometimes we need to take a step back and realize that what we might be designing, and while it might look great to us, is not the experience that the user has with all those tools. And so just be mindful, right, that these things that we're providing you, these are tools, these are living documents, these are things that we need to reflect on, as Erica has just been describing. And so take these tools, but we really hope that you guys try to use these tools ultimately to, in your own way, gather data so that you can then understand the ecosystem that you are in and then how to create your own roadmap with that. And these are tools that we use, but we're constantly revising them. And Erica and I are constantly working because some of the times we have challenging situations where they just don't work. And how do we continue to refine these over and over and again? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A. But hopefully we have plenty of time for the Q&A. So if you guys have questions, please start populating the Q&A. But what we hope that you have done is be able to leave this with just a greater awareness of some of the tools that Erica and I have had experience with that we think have certainly helped our productivity and success. Things of ways that you can create structure and communication that hopefully then allows you to have an effective lab team, but also allows you to then mitigate some of the challenges that might arise. And ultimately, the goal is that these tools, and they will be shared with you at the end, are allow you to increase the confidence of really building a productive and happy research team. Eric and I thought a lot about how do we kind of summarize this 45-minute presentation into kind of 2 key takeaway messages. And so I think for us, right, what we settled on was the 2 big key takeaway messages that we think for building a productive research team is 1, understanding what can be hidden from the trainee and ensuring that you develop tools to make the implicit explicit for them. And this changes depending on where you are, what environment you are, how much information those students have, but really trying to understand what can you make unhidden so that things are more obvious to the entire stakeholders that are involved in your research team. The second really is thinking about ways to empower your students. The goal with many of these tools that we've shared is we really want every individual to actively participate. And this is why we keep talking about making these living documents. Because if they actively participate in the decision-making process, then they're better able to learn how to adapt to difficult situations and challenges. And that allows you another tool to have those conversations with your students, but empowers them to then go on into the different opportunities and careers that they might have. And these tools will be really lifelong tools that you're developing. And so as we noted throughout the presentation, these are a list of many of the resources that we talked about. The slides, I believe, will be made available to you if you want access to those and you weren't able to, no need to copy them down. And now we'll kind of stop and take a pause and start answering some of the questions that are in the Q&A, but certainly feel free to populate that and then we can address any questions that you guys might have. Thank you. So, yeah, if you want to do that. Wonderful. So we're going to pop on and look at there's a couple questions in the Q&A, and I'll start just because I've had a chance to look at them, and then we'll go with others. So 2 of the questions really focus on how do you manage undergraduate students who fail to repeatedly meet expectations? And I think this is one of the biggest challenges that we all face, right? Is we can have these expectation documents, but how do we then navigate the challenges when the students don't meet those expectations? I'll start by saying that in my own experience, it has greatly improved my ability to deal with these situations when I started to develop both the IDPs or my lab expectation form. And I think the key thing for me in these situations is, like Erica said, is use these tools, but put very concrete timelines on when you want to see and how you want to see improvement. So by not having open-ended, we need to improve, but we need to do this, this, and this under this time frame, allows you to then provide clear line of communication, but then also something that you can fall back on to say, like, look, we agreed upon this, and now this has not been achieved. And that gives you the power and the resources to then not make it a surprise if things aren't working out. And so for me, these tools that we provided you, they don't solve the problems, but they do give you at least some ways to then check in so that you can kind of mitigate them and they don't last for a long period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Javier is saying and have seen that it's best to headed off at the pass by having really clear communications. Now, if a student is really struggling, there might be other reasons why they're struggling. They might be struggling in other aspects of their life as well. And then that might be beyond the scope of what sort of mentorship you can provide them. And so I think also being aware of other resources that students might need in their life to kind of help them assess where they're at in a broader sense, whether that's sort of counseling services on campus or other resources that might be there for them. But I think just also being aware that maybe you don't have all the answers. And if a student's really struggling after you've made your expectations clear and also given them a little bit of grace in understanding where they're really struggling, right? Asking them, why do you think you're struggling with this? Where do you feel like you could, where are you where do you see the challenges in your own productivity? If that still doesn't get you anywhere, then maybe understanding that they might have issues that need more help beyond what you can provide.
Yeah. There's another great question of, can we briefly comment on some of the best practices to recruit students from diverse backgrounds to research? This is a great question, and has been something that Eric and I have talked about in other presentations, is how do you then build a research team that's diverse, and that diversity enhances the productivity? And I think that's something that's very, very important. And I think one of the same strategies that we talked about, I think, play a role in recruiting, is if you have going into the process where you are trying to then understand what the expectations are and meet the students where they're at, allows you to break down those barriers of why they might feel anxious or nervous or things about joining research groups. But also the key thing for me is many students just don't know about the research opportunities that are out there. And this is one of those things that's like, the more that I teach class, I actually open up class and share with them what I do as a researcher is my first class for teaching organic chemistry, and why I'm excited about the subject and how I got into the field. And many of the students in my own undergrad class just don't know about these opportunities. And so again, this is where we think it's obvious what the advantages are, but trying to make that obvious to groups that are not necessarily understanding the opportunities of doing research allows us to then recruit for a broader audience.
And I'll just add that I think leveraging your current or former students who have done research with you can be very helpful too, because sometimes students hearing from their peers can help, sort of mitigate their fears around their imposter syndrome, feeling like they are not qualified for doing research or they're not competitive enough, and hearing from their peers can help them feel more confident in getting involved in opportunities. Let's see. Oh, there's a question about managing large groups.
Yeah,
larger
so
than 20.
yeah, I can address that. So I have a large group. I have a group of about 20 graduate students and postdocs, and doesn't include, probably 6 to 10 undergraduates. And it is much more challenging. It can be challenging to manage these large groups. And some tools that I do in addition to what we have here is I have smaller research groups within that. And so I break this up and oftentimes try to identify faculty members or graduate students or postdocs that want to take on more leadership roles and teach them some of the tools that we discussed today to then help them to build an ecosystem that allows me to manage such a large group. But we have more check-ins with different groups as far as like research productivity, meeting, less one-on-one meetings and more kind of like team meetings around projects that are where the students are associated on a similar task within a research goal, right? But these clear communications will help you with your time management with the larger groups, right? Which I think is one of the key things. Yeah.
There's someone has their hand raised. Melissa, can people unmute? Do they have the
You're ready for her
Okay.
question.
Okay, yeah.
All right, Marty, you should be good. Well, if you want to move to the next question in the
Yeah.
Q&A.
Yep.
Sounds
give her a
good.
second to
We
get
can
her
come back to
microphone.
you. Yeah, sounds good. There's so much good content in the chat too.
Yeah.
Just trying.
So one of the questions is, how do I find that peer mentoring is very useful in pairing junior students with senior ones to effect and very effective. But do you have any tips for providing support to the more senior students in helping them keep their mentee on track? I'll turn this over to Erica because I think the document that she was talking about with the mentee document is a good place to start, right? Is that has some things that are available.
Yeah, I think so. So maybe support for these more senior students who are in a position of mentoring. I think that, that first of all, you as the PI, being able to kind of provide them a little bit of support as mentors is really helpful, right? So that they feel confident in being able to mentor their younger peers. And these, we have often seen either very early stage graduate students or senior stage undergraduates successfully mentor younger undergraduate students. And I think just having them have very clear expectations for both of them, because they're both early researchers, right? So they need extra support, and having them go through a document like the mentor-mentee expectations document to really kind of have them both discuss these questions they might have, might also make sure that any questions that the peer mentor themselves has, because I think this can be an issue where the peer mentor is not that much more senior and knowledgeable than the mentee. And so if they have questions that come up in these kind of alignment exercises, then they know to come to you and get those questions answered rather than continuing down a track that may not end very well. So I don't know if that kind of helps, but
I agree.
There was a question. Oh, so yeah, the slides are being made available. So all those resources contained in there, you'll have access to. So let's see, someone said they tried to use my IDP in science careers with their undergrads. It felt like it was pretty involved. Yeah. So yes, the resource, yes, I have not seen the My IDP and Chem IDP resources as being great resources for early stage undergrads. At the very earliest, it should be sort of a very late stage undergrad, so senior transitioning to probably graduate school. I think they're more effective at the graduate training level. But those other resources that we pointed to that are specific for undergrads, the one the American Physical Society put together, that's been very helpful. And we use a version of that with a lot of our undergraduates here. And that seems to be kind of at the right pace for them. Oh, so this is a question about thoughts on mentoring students when there are too many students and not enough lab space for students to get research experiences in the lab. I think that, so one thought that comes to mind is helping students identify research experiences external to their home institution. So there are plenty of summer research opportunities out there that students can apply for at various other institutions across the nation. And so that's a great thing to really encourage. And maybe one thing is to help to actually create a list that you can share with the students, because oftentimes students feel like it's an overwhelming task to try and find these internship opportunities if they don't have any guidance. So one thing you could do is, maybe take a little bit of time to either host an event where you can describe the process of looking for these opportunities, or perhaps if you could carve out a tiny bit of time in your classes to use that time I think, there are different lab classes, obviously, that are kind of modeled after more research sort of oriented work, and that is great if your institution offers such kind of lab classes. I don't know, do you have other ideas?
I think those are pretty good ideas. That's a big challenge, right? So I think we have two more and then we're running out of time, I believe. Is that right, Melissa? So just real fast, there's two questions in the Q&A. One, what are strategies you recommend to motivate students when they're going through a down patch? Yeah, this is tough. And I think that one of the things that I do is, again, reminding students what happens is they get so narrowly focused in the small time frame that they're in. And so just, I think, walking through and actively listening to that and then describing to them just the bigger picture is somewhat helpful, right? And then recommending other peers. And then the last question is my question about compensation. This is an interesting one. How do we balance this idea between when we pay them, give them research credit, or just experience? And I think that this is something that is depending on your institution. But what I do is I recognize that many of the students, if you can pay them and you have the resources to do so, that's where I go to as option one, because this gives them then a commitment from you to them. It allows them to make money, which is something, again, that is obvious to us, but not obvious to everyone else. And then oftentimes I will transition from there to credit to then experience, if possible. Wonderful.
So I hope we didn't miss anything. I'm sorry if, maybe there's one more question that came through. So this last question, maybe we can end with this, is sort of for maybe geared towards programs that are taking in summer research students. And so I think we can both kind of address that because we both run such programs. So we, for example, have gotten rid of our GPA requirement just to lower the barrier to entry for a lot of our programs. We found that that's been a helpful thing to remove. It also just sort of sends a message to the students that we are looking at them from a holistic perspective, not just at their GPAs. Now, this is not the case for every program across the nation, right? I mean, there are many programs that do still rely on GPAs, and in some cases they do because they're getting so many applications that they feel like it's, some kind of weeding criteria that they can use. But I think letting students know that in a lot of these selection processes, they are really being viewed from a holistic perspective, or taking into account their statements of interest, letters of recommendation, if those are a part of the application. And really they want to see that the student has genuine interest and curiosity, and that they've taken some initiative and are really motivated to have an experience and make the most of an experience. Yeah, and I think that's changing. I think that there's more discussion in the community to make sure that these opportunities are available to a variety of students coming in from a variety of stages of knowledge and experience.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Yep. So as we wrap up, I'll just reiterate that our presenters have offered to share their slides. So we'll send that via the email that you registered for today. And on behalf of our team, I'll just thank our speakers and our interpreters for their work today. It's a great discussion, and we look forward to connecting with our audience in the future.